Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Jennifer Snapp, and I am a literacy consultant for Wayne Risa. And on the call are my colleagues. If you can all come off mic and introduce yourselves, and then we can get started.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Austin. I'm also a literacy consultant here at RISA, and I'm really excited for today's session.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Gabrion. I'm also a literacy consultant here at Wayne Risa.
All right, so again, I am Jennifer Snapp, and I will be your facilitator for today. So I'm going to turn my camera off, but I can still hear you, and my colleagues are on to also support and kind of monitor the chat for us today. Thank you. All right, so we're going to start off with our land acknowledgement. And if you were in the session on Monday, you are familiar with this. So we begin by acknowledging the land on which we stand in the ancestral land of several indigenous tribes, including the Anishinaabe, or the Three Fires, which were comprised of the Ojibwe, which is the Chippewa, and the Ottawa, which is the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi, also in the area where the Peoria, Fox, Wyandotte, and Miami tribes. We just want to make sure that we acknowledge that because we do reside on borrowed land. Today's agenda. So first of all, we're going to talk about the rationale for today's session, our values and working agreements. And then we're going to have fun with selecting a quote. And we're going to cover essential practice 1 for grades K 4-5 and 6-12. And then we're going to talk about some connections to our pedagogy, and then reflection and closing. And also included in that reflection and closing, we're going to have a moment to jot down our takeaways. So I just want to play a quick video for you. And as you're watching this video, think about what affirms your current classroom practice, what invites you to continue growing your practice in the 2022-2023 school year.
We, the Wayne Risa Literacy Team, continue to explore, learn, and collaborate with one another in an effort to advance literacy practices that promote equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racist. To that end, we have crafted beliefs and commitments to advancing this work. We believe literacy is actionable, liberatory, and humanizing. We believe robust interdisciplinary literacy instruction empowers students' voice and agency to enact positive change. We believe equitable literacy instruction connects to students' identities by linking literacy to their histories and cultures while developing their skills, intellect, criticality, and joy. We believe equitable literacy practices are not static. They are ongoing and fluid. We believe in fostering opportunities for students to improve their reading, writing, thinking, and speaking abilities in ways that prepare them to more fully understand power, oppression, equity, and how they might lift their voice for positive change. We believe students should have access to enabling texts that are culturally and socially relevant and tasks that are robust and engaging. We also believe to enact change, we must examine our own biases and develop knowledge of our world by exploring multiple perspectives. So to that end, we pledge to create brave spaces that honor individual and collective journeys, to interrogate our beliefs as they pertain to pedagogy, curriculum, and school policies. We also pledge to facilitate courageous conversations and to push our growing edge. If you are interested in starting these conversations in your school or district, please see the link below for the works that have inspired us, and we thank you.
So here at Wayne Risa, and I'm sure in your districts as well, it is important for us to share our beliefs and our values because they are key parts of our identities. And this can also be an entry point into greater share of vulnerability in our learning community. So with that being said, this is just all a sign of our humanity. And it wants to play it twice. So today, our rationale for today's session, I like to have engaging sessions. So I would like for 3 different people to please come off of the mic, and for one person to take bullet 1, someone to take the second rationale, and then a third person to take the third one. Again, we like to have engaging sessions because we're going to do a lot of talking today. So go ahead and let's start. I just see one person.
Hello. I'm on my phone, so it's not really the best view for the video, but can you hear me?
Yes, Mrs. Patrick,
Hi.
thank you. Hi.
Hi there. I'm from Wyandotte Roosevelt High School. It's downriver, south of Detroit there.
Welcome.
So I am welcome. Thank you for putting this on. I'm reading rationale number 1, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Helping teachers, coaches, and school leaders co-construct culturally relevant literacy communities with MISA 4-5 and 6-12 literacy essentials at the center.
Thank you. And I need a second person to read the second rationale for today.
Hello, my name is Hiba Kazal, and
Ms.
I
Kazal.
can read. How are you? I'm with Dearborn Public Schools. I'm a kindergarten teacher, and I'll read the second rationale. Using Dr. Kimberly Parker's literacy is liberation to empower teachers, coaches, and school leaders to build intentional, abundant literacy communities where each student's strengths are recognized, their funds of knowledge are valued, their identities are honored, and they find joy as readers and writers.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kazal. And
I'll read the third one.
thank you, Ms. Bryant.
Applying literacy is liberation, and the MESA 4-5 and 6-12 literacy essentials to repair and prevent harm to students as readers and writers. Honor and value student, family, and community ways of knowing. Develop abundant opportunities for culturally relevant reading and learning how to support youth voices while normalizing high expectations for all students.
Thank you so much for all 3 of our readers today. We appreciate you engaging in the session so early. So with these rationales in mind, let's remember that our literacy is actionable, it is humanizing, liberatory, and it is evolving. Thank you. And for our working agreements, we're going to remember to engage in humble inquiry, to commit to being present, which means including taking care of yourself and our community as needed. Embrace non-closure and take a learner's stance. All right, so now is our time to let's get busy and let's get down to the work. So we're going to pick a quote for identity-affirming literacy spaces. So I would like for everyone to read the quotes. I'm going to read them out loud, read them silently. And this comes from Dr. Parker's Literacy is Liberation. While you are reading, I want you to select a quote that is resonating with you. And please consider why it's speaking to you. And then you're going to have 3 minutes to write or reflect on that quote. After the 3 minutes, you're going to put the number of the quote that resonated with you the most into the chat. And this will help us frame the conversation for the rest of today's session. Quote 1, everyone deserves the freedom to read whatever they want to read. They, meaning BIPOC students, also have most likely read texts that have not reflected or affirmed their broad backgrounds. 2, The goal of independent reading as an instructional practice is to build habitual readers with conscious reading identities. 3, young people need to know they belong to this literary history, and they are responsible for its continuance. However, if they do not have access to broad literary experience that connects them to past and present, they will be unable to assure that continuity. And 4, learning about the talents and experiences our students already have when they walk into our doors is imperative to being culturally relevant. So take a minute to think about that, which one resonates with you. And then we're going to take 3 minutes to kind of jot on the side your thoughts, and then we're going to share. So I've set the timer for 3 minutes. Okay, I see we have some people who have already put their numbers in the chat. Great. All right, what do you see mostly, Jeff? What number?
I'm seeing a lot of 4s coming up. That is the pattern that is definitely present for me, although there's a smattering of some other numbers, but mostly 4.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I see a lot of 4s too. So let's just talk about 4 real quick. Learning about the talents and experiences our students already have when they walk into our doors is imperative to being culturally relevant. Can someone just come off of mic and just talk about that for a minute? Why is that resonating with you? Why is that important? Okay. So there were several people who put 4 in. Would you care to share anyone who put a 4 in? Why did you select quote number 4? Why is that resonating with you right now?
Hi, I'm Prina Wilcher, and
Thank you.
why I selected 4 is because I'm a firm believer that you need to get to know your students. And once you get to know, you can kind of engage, what's culturally relevant in your class.
Yes.
You can also find their likes and dislikes to kind of help wanting to read. So getting to know your students, and it also shows that you as a teacher
Ms. Wilcher, you are going in and out. So I think we missed a lot of probably important things that you had to say, especially in the end of what you were saying. Okay. So Ms.
May I
Wilcher,
share?
yes, please, Ms. Gazelle.
As a kindergarten teacher in a Dearborn Public Schools, we have mostly ELL students, and they come from many different countries. And the ratios of boys and girls also differ. So knowing and understanding what kind of understanding of reading the children come in with is vital for me as a teacher to understand what kind of literature to introduce to them in order to grab their attention, or in order to talk about things that are culturally relevant to them, things that they're interested in. And I believe that is something that has worked with me for the past 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for one more person. If you want to speak on why you selected quote 4. All right, we're going to move on. All right, so thinking about the quote number 4, Let's connect that to the essential practice 1 for grades 4 through 5, and then we're going to look at the essential practice 1 for grades 6 through 12. So we're talking about here is deliberate research informed efforts to foster motivation and engagement within and across lessons. So for the first bullet, it says helps establish meaningful purposes for children to read and write beyond being assigned or expected to do, such as for their enjoyment, their interests, to answer general or discipline-specific questions about the natural and social world, to address community needs, or to communicate with specific audiences. It also attends to and cultivates student interest by connecting literacy experiences to students' family and community experiences. Does that quote that we selected, or the other quotes for a matter of fact, do they connect, do they resonate with this essential practice? You can just give a thumbs up in the chat. So Jeff, is that connecting with everyone?
Yeah, we've got some great responses to quote for in the chat too about how this was resonating with people.
Can you share?
I think they very much connect. So Colleen is talking about 4 resonates with her because it helps build covenant relationships with students. Nancy says that when texts are relevant to what students are experiencing in their identities, they're more interested, more motivated to read. And students, if you know your students' backgrounds and experiences, you also can provide access to text that will connect with them, and that will foster a love of learning and reading that is lifelong. And then we also have a bunch of folks that have responded, yeah, that this totally connects. Thumbs up, lots of enthusiastic yeses. So seems like that's all a good thing.
Great, great. All right, so now we're going to move on to grades 6 through 12, problem-based instruction. And so in the essential practice, it says that this helps students make sense of text from different time periods, cultures, and regions. And let me back up, Jeff, thank you so much for sharing those comments. 2, it aids students in seeing themes from literature in their everyday lives and identities, such as their culture, their racial, ethnic, and gendered. And 3, attends to and cultivates student interest by connecting literary experiences to students' family and community experiences. And 4, creates opportunities for students to enact literate identities, drawing from both within and outside of their school literacy practices and funds of knowledge, which of course is providing opportunities for students to see themselves as authors by publishing and sharing their work in the school community. So thank you everyone who shared, because you all made some great points and they do connect directly with the essential practices. And so now we want to move on to ILCs, which are culturally relevant intentional literacy communities. And the quote says, "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it." Let me read that again. You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself as belonging to it and responsible for changing it. How do the title and the quote resonate in perspective to your instructional practices? A penny for your thought. So if Jeff has not already, he's going to drop a link to the Padlet. And if you could please go ahead and put your thoughts about this quote under the first column on the Padlet. Okay, one person wrote, "Belonging creates community. Without it, there is no community. Belonging allows me access to understanding society and provides me with inputs on how to utilize my specialty to help and serve others in a way that is acceptable and relevant to their needs." I feel the quote is reminding us that if students and parents do not feel as though they are a part of something, they will not respond in a positive manner. That is so true. Anyone else? Okay, one must take ownership in many things in education, including what is happening in our world, as well as the world at large, by demonstrating to our students that we are interested in positive change. We enable them to address their own needs, both immediate and future. Yes. Admit the problem, believe you can solve it, commit yourself to change. I like that. If you don't feel as if you belong, you don't care. Yes. And students need to feel as if they belong and can make a difference in their classroom. Absolutely. In order to change anything, you have to have a desire for change and make sure you are incorporating students and parents into the classroom and school. Yes, that is very, very true. Thank you for sharing. Okay, when working with a population of students, you should see it as your duty to help guide them, be involved, care, and show interest. It's your responsibility. I like how, as educators, we are taking responsibility for our teaching, what we do. It is so important. It cannot just be all the students' responsibility or the parents. As the facilitators, we guide students in everything that we do. So exactly. Thank you so much for sharing. So when we talk about culturally relevant, intentional literacy communities, oh, yes, Rosalyn, we have a hand.
Yes, I just love that. I don't know who wrote that, but someone said this idea of it is our duty. I think that's so powerful. And I just wanted to lift that comment because it takes it to a very different space, right? When you think of it as a duty to be supportive, to be nurturing, to build community in your classroom, it just takes a very different balance. So I just want to lift that comment and say how much I appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you so much for lifting that, Roz. I also like this other one. It says action shows willingness to help and make change, not just being a bystander. And we cannot be bystanders. So absolutely, thank you. So here when we talk about what is CRIP, culturally relevant intentional literacy communities, is a space where educators can work deliberately with their students to create a literacy environment that is systematically normalizes the higher achievement of everyone within that community. It is asset-based. It encourages and nurtures vulnerability, and is driven by collectivism and social political change. So when we talk about asset-based, we talked about it earlier, in quote 4 is what our students bring to the classroom. And we should look at it as an asset base and not deficit, because our children bring so much to our classrooms when they come in. They have a wealth of experience from their community, from their home, from their culture. And then when they come in, it's like, we need to welcome that. We need to open the doors and hear their voices. In addition to their talents and the rich histories that they bring. Too often we have our own biases which hinder us as educators in accepting our students for who they are and their identities. It is so important as teachers that we encourage our students to bring their experiences, to speak up in the classroom. And talk about, what is taking place outside of the classroom and how does it impact them as learners and as teachers when they're in the classroom. And when we talk about collectivism and social political change, teachers and students, we are all in this together and we have to share our experiences as well. Remember, as teachers, we are to guide our students and not, I want to say not change their thinking, but help them to critically think about things that impact not just our lives, but the world as a global opportunities that they may have, global problems that are taking place. Would anyone care to add to this piece right here?
I'd like to say something.
Yes.
I love the idea of vulnerability because everyone feels like they have to give the right answer. And sometimes we learn more from the wrong answers, and it helps us to understand, as a teacher, I try to tell them, I'm going to make a lot of mistakes up here, and we're not going to be, the mistakes and that idea of we can make a mistake and we can learn so much from this mistake. You just can't operate in a classroom without kids getting used to that, because they want to come in being perfect and nobody getting that wrong answer. And that's not, you make mistakes when you learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thank you so much, Ms. Thrasher, for lifting that, because if we were all perfect, then we wouldn't learn, right? We learn from our failures, as some people say. I don't like to say failure. I like to say we learn from our experiences. We learn when we don't do something in what we consider as correct, because it makes us get up and, hey, start over, or, tweak it and make it better. So thank you for lifting that. Anyone else?
Hi, I like this kind of piggybacks on what she just spoke to, but I also like this idea of asset-based. Like, so many times we think when we come into the classroom as teachers, we have it all and we're giving it this way, but we can get so much coming back to us. So the idea to think that our students have stuff for us to learn and to build on as well. So it's kind of like that idea of what she was saying before, where we can learn, we can build off of wrong answers. We can build off of our students' experiences too. It's not just like output from us, but it's output from our students as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Absolutely. One more person. Since we're talking about a chart, we have a triangle here. 3 is completion. Any other ideas?
I've started with my adult learners to put a prompt up and let the students create the questions, and then they do the research to answer their own questions. And I find that they seem to learn a lot better. I'm trying to get myself out of being the focus and let them be communicating with one another and working together. So I do the prompt, try to make it interesting, depending upon what it is I'm teaching that day, and let them do all the research.
That's great, Nancy. You're taking that stance of a facilitator, and that's what we need to do. So thank you for that. Thank you for lifting that, and also working, in that manner with your students. You're forcing them to take ownership of their own learning. All right. And so now let's talk about this literacy and community. What comes to mind when we think about places where members all need something for each other and they all provide something to each other? So what comes to mind when you think about literacy and community? What comes to mind when you think about traditional barriers to literacy? And also, what comes to your mind when you think in your classroom for all of your students? Think about that and just go ahead and popcorn out. You recall at the beginning, I said this is going to be an engaging session, so we all need to talk.
I'm going to throw this out there. This is not per se a traditional barrier to literacy when I grew up, but today, just what I feel is the impact that such computer use and constant screen time and constant stimulation has had on kids' ability to settle down and calm down and focus on reading. So, we try to develop their reading stamina throughout the year. And by the end of 5th grade, our goal is, can you maintain reading, relaxing for like half an hour at a time, 40 minutes at a time? Some kids can't do that. And I can't help relate it to what I've seen technology do to our minds. And I think too much screen time is warping their minds in a lot of ways. There's good things that come from the computer, but it's also, I mean, I'm sure you guys have had that same feeling at some point that they just can't focus. And I guess the next, one of the last questions here, how do you ensure academic success in your classroom for all students? Well, there's an awful lot of things here, but when I'm focusing on reading, you know, I try to make time every day for them to read, to have awesome books in my classroom. And I try to do book talks. And, you know, I've got a big library, but kids will always go to the same books. And so you try to turn kids on to books that they normally would never even think of reading. And they're like, oh my gosh, I love this author now. I want to read other books by this author. So kind of, you know, when you're interested in something and you want to do it, and it's a joy, it's a pleasure, and to have them experience that so they, you know, hopefully want to read it on their own. So those are just a couple thoughts.
Okay, thank you for sharing. That makes a lot of sense, and I do agree. I've heard teachers say, you know, screen time, it's a lot right now. So consider this, thinking about how can you take that technology piece and turn it into something positive for students to use, you know, maybe cutting down the screen time, but how can we bring that technology into the classroom, into reading that would benefit them?
And yeah, and you're right. The flip side of that, we have wonderful computer programs, Raz Kids, lots of different reading programs that are interesting to them to use. So technology can be great, but I guess I'm thinking about, you know, especially fifth graders, like they're into the video games and everyone's TikTok and they're always flipping through their phones, and just, I don't see, I want to help my students to build the stamina to focus on reading or to focus on any task in front of them. I see kids coming in with a lack of focus to read or do anything else. So to me, I think that's a big challenge right now.
Yeah. Are there any ideas out there for Michelle, how to help her, you know, with her students to gain that balance?
I think a big part too is there's not a lot of reading going on in my students' homes. I am quite sure that a lot of my kids don't have a book in their home to pick up and read, and they certainly aren't going to get on their computer or their phone and read anything because they don't see anybody else doing it. And, you know, I think it's really important that teachers model. I used to read books aloud to my students, and with everything that is now on us to teach, who's got the time to even take, you know, 15 minutes to read a section from a book per day when, you know, you've got to meet all these standards and stuff. And I think that we're getting away from the basic premise of education, which is to teach students.
Yes, thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Denise. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
well.
hi.
Hi.
So I was just going to say, I do think that there are definitely struggles that we're seeing with, you know, exposure to technology, and we do know that we have a ton of standards to teach, so those are pressures. However, I think for me, one of the things that I recognized in transferring to a new district a few months ago is that a lot of the students weren't reading because they did not know how to read and interact with the text, right? So although I was teaching fifth graders, you know, we can assume that they know these skills intrinsically or that the teacher before us has taught them, but that's not necessarily the case. So for me, my teaching focus shifted to teaching, you know, and modeling explicitly, you know, how do we break apart this paragraph? How do we identify the main idea? So it shifted to like focusing on the best practices and, you know, instructional strategies to help them unpack the reading. And then that made the reading more accessible. And I think, you know, even though I only had a couple of months with them, a lot of them I saw, you know, picking up books of interest and finding books, especially anime like based books, to mirror, you know, the shows that they watch at home. So I think it's just we have to get a little bit crafty and creative with our approach.
I agree, Denise. Thank you for sharing that. Sometimes we can do a little advertising, like books that we have found successful with other students, or when, students share something with us from perhaps other classes. You can just like kind of introduce that book and read maybe the first chapter in a very animated way, or the first few pages, to draw and hook students' attention. And then once it's out there and they're like excited and like, okay, well, if you want to find out what happens, you have to read the rest of the story, and then have a couple of copies, available in your classroom. So thank you, Denise, for sharing that. That was a great lift. We're going to move ahead because time is upon us. And as I switch over to the next screen, we're getting ready to go out into a breakout session. And so you're going to have an opportunity to discuss a little bit more about culturally relevant pedagogy. And so we want to think about 4 things: academic success, expectations, cultural competence, development of a social, political, or critical consciousness. So remember that in order for students to have academic success, they should not be shamed or punished for expressing their identities. Expectations, it is our beliefs, or I should say our beliefs should not dictate our expectations for students' academic capabilities. And how do you relay your expectations for student work and success? And also understand who your students are by talking with them about their cultural and individual lives. And these all come from the page numbers that are listed in Dr. Parker's book. And last but not least, support students in recognizing, understanding, and critiquing social injustices by questioning, challenging, and processing their words. And that's from Latz and Billings. Empower our students by adding tools to their toolbox. And remember, every student comes to the class with a toolbox. Some of them are more full than others. So it's part of our job to just constantly add tools for them to utilize so that they can become more successful students. And so now Jeff or Laura, I don't know which one, but they're going to go ahead and create breakout sessions. We're going to take about 5 minutes to talk about these 4 different points, and then select one person from your group to share out with the whole group when we return. What questions might you have about the directions? Okay, great. Laura, you're doing the breakout rooms, correct?
Yeah, but just 1 second here and we'll whisk you away.
All right.
Into breakout rooms.
Thank you. Rosalyn, I saw that you had a hand up earlier. I apologize for not getting to you.
No worries. Well, I'll share when we come back.
You want to share now while we're still
Well, I just I really was thinking about some of the comments that were stated earlier around students' access to text. And so what I wanted to put into the community for thought is, how are we really even defining what a text is, right? So I think because we might be thinking very traditionally that some of the things that kids are reading may not be how we're defining reading. So thinking about ways to kind of bridge that piece. How are they reading their video games? How are they reading some of the shows that they're watching or the TikToks, right? So, and how can we use that as a bridge to some of the reading tasks that we ask them to do in our classroom? So that might be part of your conversation too, expanding our notions of literacy and reading and what we think of as reading.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I do notice I have a 16-year-old and she is just fascinated with these new books that are online where authors are creating unfinished books. And so they read the books as the author is creating them. And so sometimes they have to wait a week or 2 or 3 before the author continues or finishes the next chapter. So that's a great thought. Thank you for lifting that, Roz. All right, Laura, are we ready? Okay, seems like everyone has come back to the main room. So I asked for one person in each group to share out your conversation. So can someone please come off mic and go ahead and share what was discussed in your group?
I can go first.
Thank you so much.
So we were talking, so I actually teach ELA at Beacon in high school, which is, for the emotionally impaired students. And my person in the breakout room teaches in public school and kindergarten. So it was really interesting to have that big of a gap to kind of pull together this discussion. But what we kind of both said is, kids come to us, on so many different levels, and we have this set curriculum that we're supposed to get them to, and we're all open to considering all of these cultural and social injustices, all these things that are going on. But what are the appropriate resources, and where are they? Where are those books? Where are those articles? How do we make sure that the good of the whole group is benefiting as well? And that's kind of where we said we're open-minded to do all of this stuff, but what's the book I should teach? Where is it at? And she kind of said the same things. They come in kindergarten and they're all at different levels, and she's supposed to get them all to the same place. And a lot of times, we want kids from 9th grade to learn everything in 9th grade and get to 10th grade. But if they came in and they're on a 5th grade level, they're not going to gain 4 years in 1 year. That's just not how it works. So yeah, I think we're all, well, I don't say we're all, in my session, we were really open to this discussion and all of these ideas, but we want the resources.
Okay, well, maybe you can email myself and Rosalyn, Dr. Shahid afterwards. We may have an opportunity for next year, unfortunately not this year, but
okay,
reach out to us afterwards. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I can add to, so we'll drop some of the resources that we've been curating over the years in the chat for you to see. But one piece that we're finding that's really helpful is this idea of accelerating students by that idea of bridging what they already know, what they already bring to us, right? With the goals of your classroom and your curriculum. Because essentially what we're trying to do is build kids' schema, right?
Right.
And through that zone of proximal development is where the learning occurs. So it sounds like you want concrete strategies. And one of the, we have a series coming up, Dr. Alfred Tatum, he talks explicitly about this idea of advancing disciplinary literacy in the elementary grades. And he uses writing as a technique for advancing reading, writing, and intellectual development. So that might be a series that you're also interested in attending. And again, providing books where kids see themselves. And next week, I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that, like what those books are explicitly. Providing opportunities for kids to talk to one another, because that also serves as a bridge for their writing development, thinking, so forth and so on. So I appreciate your question, and we're going to continue to network so we can provide adequate resources for you. But again, I'll drop some of those links in the chat. I need to get on in another way so I can start to drop some of those for you.
Rosalyn, I think it might be a great idea as well if you can put them on the Padlet.
Yes.
Add another column for resources, and that way they'll always have access to it.
That's a beautiful idea. Thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome. Thank you, Sarah, again, for lifting that question. All right, for the next group, who would like to share out? Okay. Who's our next person to share out?
I'll go next. We
Yeah.
were talking about that a similar issue that was just discussed about dealing with students who are at a variety of different levels. And I was sharing that I'm a GED instructor, and so I have students who have reading levels from 4th grade up to 12th grade. So it's kind of hard to coordinate all of those together, and they're all doing different subjects. So just the challenges, we were talking about those challenges.
There are a lot of challenges, and we have to be realistic and understanding, Nancy, that it's real. You know, sometimes in small group instruction is another way that we can kind of give students that support, especially those who fall into that tier 3 category. As Dr. Shahid said, we will continue to put resources onto the Padlet so that you all have access, and perhaps you can find something that works for your class. So thank you. Do we have one more group?
I can speak to what my partner and I were talking about. We kept coming back to the idea of cultural competency and just how it can be used as such a powerful asset in our classrooms. Getting to know each of our students, and as a language teacher, I'm always talking about what other cultures do, and just to tap that in, like, hey, tell me about what goes on in your family or in your home. And my partner spoke about an activity where people take pictures of what they do in their own environments and how that's powerful. So they're not just talking, but they're showing, this is what it looks like for me. So it's such a powerful tool, and how we need to tap into that and just really understand it, and then let students let their guards down and they trust you more, and you learn so much as a teacher, as an educator as well.
Yes, Rebecca, thank you for lifting that, and to remember that when you bring in that cultural competence piece and then bringing books that align with what students have shown you, what you've discussed, and then having them write about it. They can even write their own books, and that may spark their interest into reading more. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for lifting that. So a lot of times when we teach ELA or we teach literacy, we only focus on ELA. And I think in all content areas, if we were teaching the same strategies, but in focusing on those contents, that it would be easier for students to see how it all connects. And so that's a whole different conversation that we need to have, but we need to start thinking about interdisciplinary literacies. Okay, so connections. This is one of our last slides. What connections are you making to the quote that you selected on slide 8? Most people selected quote 4, but we did see a couple 1s and 2s. Also think about today's session, the essential practice, which was 1, and your classroom practices. I want you just to listen to this video of Dr. Muhammad when she talks about us being culturally and historically responsive. And then when we finish, we'll just, again, we'll go to the Padlet and then jot down our connections to all of this and see how we can pull it all together.
So Dr. Muhammad, let's start by, for folks who aren't that familiar with your framework. So your framework for culturally and historically responsive literacy really focuses on four learning pursuits. So identity, intellect, criticality, and skills. Now, for folks who aren't familiar, can you maybe give us an overview of what those mean, and how does this approach differ from how teachers have traditionally been taught to teach?
Yeah, so, as I was studying these Black literary societies throughout the 1800s, I really wanted to know what were some of the learning goals that they had when it comes to literacy learning, but also for educational learning, not just thinking about like English language arts or literature. I also thought about mathematics and science and history. And so when I was studying the historical archives, like public addresses that they had given during that time, old newspapers that they had published in, I came to an understanding that they essentially had these 4 major goals for learning. And they called their learning goals pursuits. And so they did not call them learning standards, because I found that learning standards comes more from Eurocentricity. It's a word that's sort of like seeped in whiteness. It wasn't a word that communities of color used to describe their learning goals. And so of the 4 goals, the first was identity development. I noticed that every time they were reading and writing and thinking and learning, they were making sense of who they are, who they were, who they weren't, who they wanted and desired to be. So all the complexity that comes with identity, they were making sense of their lives. And they were also learning about the lives of other people. They would read and learn from literature from all over the world, including China. And so they didn't just focus on themselves, but they wanted to learn about other people who were different than them as well. And then the second goal or pursuit that they had was skills. They were trying to gain the skills and the proficiencies for mathematics, for science, for all the different content areas, right? And so like comprehension, things that we would normally see like in a Common Core state standard today. The third pursuit is intellectualism. All learning was connected to action. That's the difference that I describe in the book, from knowledge to intellectualism. The difference is that one is more action-oriented, like intellectualism. And so as they were reading and writing and thinking and learning, they were becoming smarter about new ideals and concepts and people and places and things. They weren't just learning to develop skills alone. And the fourth pursuit that they had was with criticality. Now, this was an interesting one. I originally named it, which a lot of people don't know, print authority, because it was like they were learning, they would see themselves with identity, they would learn the skills with skills, they would learn the intellectualism, and they would use it to put their own critique and interrogate it to gain authority of the text. Right? We have authority of something when we know it well enough, where we can debate on it and where we can critique it. You can't just stand in a room talking about any topic if you don't have any knowledge. And you need the identity and the skills to get to that knowledge. So you can see how they were all connected. But criticality went a little further. Criticality was an understanding of equity, oppression, anti-racism. It was helping them to understand issues of marginalization, exploitation, and representation. And criticality, I'll just lastly add, it was something that helped them to, in their own words, I'm quoting here, it helped them to be able to discern between truth and falsehood at a glance. That was one of their major purposes for education. And this is something that can be useful for all students. And if I added a fifth pursuit, it would be joy. Because I noticed that even in the most turmoil of conditions and harshest and oppressive and racist times, they still loved each other and was able to cultivate joy with each other, which is very remarkable. Because when you have a lot of pain and struggle and everything is about resistance, to then say, you know what, we're gonna have joy. That's a beautiful, remarkable, humane kind of quality. And so the difference, to respond to your second question, when we take a look at those, let's say 5 pursuits, if we added joy, compared to what we see in schools and classrooms are largely, solely, or mostly pushing skills. Everything is about skill development. And it's not as much, unless you have very unique classroom spaces, about application.
Okay, so I stopped it because we are running out of time, but what are some of your thoughts about what Dr. Muhammad is saying here? What are some of your thoughts?
My thoughts are thinking about how students learn and how we engage them. And I believe that everything she talked about leads to across subject areas, teaching across subject areas, because she believes that in order for us student to learn one thing, it learn the skill. They need they need to lead to some kind of critical thinking at the end. And if we teach for example, if we teach ELA and don't connect it to social emotional development, and we don't connect it to science, and we don't connect it to math, we are not going to get a full package at the end where a child has all those skills in order for them to think critically, to analyze everything they learn, and to apply it into the real world. Thank you. It was a very nice video. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Would anyone else like to share out? And please feel free to add to the Padlet as well. Okay, so the goal here was to, based on the things that we talked about today, in addition to the quote that you selected, and I know that we all have the realities of what our students do bring to a classroom, and the different standards and assessments that we are responsible for. What are those connections that you are making? And if we could have a world, utopian world, how could we bring all this together to make our students, or to help our students be successful? I see one connection in the Padlet. It says, I feel it's important to involve community and parents at school. I am not talking about emails or newsletters. Those are good, but not really involving community. For example, parents should feel welcome to schools. If you observe a parent entering a school office, they do not look as though they feel welcome. If a school truly allows parents to help in decision-making, you will have buy-in. Teachers must truly reach out to parents. That is so true. Thank you so much for sharing that. Anyone else? Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining. Next steps, teaching and leading for change. Choose an action step for the year ahead. Collect some data to measure impact, and keep learning with us. Join our equity-based disciplinary literacies network or our Equity Leaders series. Again, we thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope that you have something that you can take away from this session that you can implement into your classroom. The Padlet is still open, so we have 2 columns that haven't really been accessed yet, but if you could please join that Padlet and put in your connections and your takeaways from today's session and how you're going to implement something new in your classroom. I'd like to thank my colleagues for supporting me here and helping me to back channel and moderate the chat.